Has a question that they would like to ask this panel, and I can ask it to them.
This is a really open-ended question. How have you seen the adoption of VDI? You know that for a while nobody was doing it. Is it on its way up? Is it plateaued? Is it going down? 3 choices.
This is the year of VDI.
Yeah, absolutely.
I couldn't resist. Good.
Well, I'll take a stab at it. I mean, so I always look at it as we have an assessment offering. Do you want us to introduce ourselves before we go? Or?
Why don't we do that? Let's start on the far side.
I'm just some random guy that walked in. I actually attend the community college upstairs. So.
The coffee barista earlier.
VMware.
Hey guys, Josh Spencer, Pernix Data.
Tyler Rohr, T-Rex, Liquidware Labs.
Sean Bass, VMware.
Jason Shiplett, Simplicity.
Mike Colson, SolidFire.
Ken Ringdahl, VMware.
Sean Massey, Ahead.
Nigel Hickey, Sigma Solutions.
Now, Matt Helstel will be the moderator.
So my answer to your question was, we make this assessment thing. We've done a ton of work with VMware over the years, a lot of the channel partners that might be here in the audience. And, you know, I would say that based on the observation of 5 or 6 million desktops, about 20% of the observed sample size are actually good candidates for VDI. So if you take 800 million, enterprise desktops, it means 160 million seats should be on VDI today, and yet we're at like 16 million probably up and running in production. I don't know. We think 8 for you, 8 for Citrix. I mean, pure production.
Higher than that.
Yeah, okay, so 20. Just maybe it's 20 something. So is it a big market or a big problem? So I think it's solution events like this. It's the innovation that all these vendors are doing that is going to continue, to climb up to that 160 million number. I don't think it's for every use case, obviously. It was funny when we first started. Everyone's like, "Oh, well, we want overseas developers and executives on airplanes." You're like, "Yeah, it's not going to be good for that." But I think the maturity is we're all learning where it does fit in our organizations. I don't know. Anyone else have thoughts? Yeah.
I think the other thing on top of that, though, is
It's not on.
there has been many, many years where we've gone through these iterations of VDI isn't ready because... Oh, sorry. So we had these numerous years of VDI is not ready because, and in the early days it was things like multimedia didn't work well and unified communications didn't work well and all these kind of things. And progressively over the years, those issues have been solved to a large degree. There's still some quirks here and there, but they've mostly been resolved. And in addition, we solved the 2 major problems that were holding back VDI, which was storage and general compute scale type issues. So now that those issues are out of the way, it doesn't mean that VDI is a use case for all users. It just means that the barriers of entry are less. And as I mentioned in my keynote earlier, it is at a stage now where it is kind of CapEx neutral. So the CapEx is not the barrier anymore. For what you can buy a PC, you can buy a VDI desktop. The OpEx is still a challenge, and I won't say the OpEx of VDI is any worse than the OpEx of physical desktops. It's just basically the same. If you're doing persistent VDI the same way you've always done physical desktops, it's basically the same. It's OpEx neutral to what you do on physical PCs. Moving things to non-persistent is the way to go. The challenge we've had is 5 years ago when people talked about non-persistent, it frankly sucked. It was really hard to do non-persistent because you ended up with a bazillion pools, one for each set of users because you didn't have things like application layering. So the game has changed a little bit. I would not say in general that non-persistent is for every single desktop use case and user. I'm still a big believer that persistent is the fastest way to onboard users to VDI. And then you do your VDI 2.0 platform a year or 2 later as you've learned those layering tools and been able to actually have the time to work on those things. But at the end of the day, the main job is just to get your desktop management better than it was before. And you can do that in a stepped model. You don't need to go all in. I think the problem most customers had when they looked at VDI is they, first of all, said, we need to do 100% of our desktops that way, immediate fail. The next thing is how do we go completely to non-persistent with our 3,000 applications? And that paralysis through analysis. 18 months later, you still haven't rolled one desktop because you're like, geez, I don't know what to do. So take it in bite-sized pieces, do it based on roles, do the low-hanging fruit, do the easy ones, and then start expanding your scope as you build your expertise.
So Sean actually made a couple of points I was gonna say around management. The other thing I'll say is the technology has significantly evolved over the last 3 to 5 years, to the point where at this point there are actually things you can do better, cheaper, faster virtually than you can physically. And so I think that is an inflection point that we're just at now, that is going to spur some additional advancement of and market expansion of VDI. To this point, we've been where, either there's advantages, whether there's security advantages, whether there's management advantages, but I think we're getting to the point where you can do things better, cheaper, faster, virtually. And we knew we'd get there, but I think we're about there now. We're not at the crest of the hill. We're probably just we're probably just getting to the crest of the hill, but I think we are almost there with the technology, and that will sort of spur some additional adoption.
Yeah, and I always talk about maturity and evolution and the life cycle of how this thing moves, and it's funny, right? So the industry as a whole, especially from an enterprise perspective, tends to lag 10 years behind the hype cycles that we see with the analysts. So everyone rushed out when we had the initial hype cycle, the year of VDI, and we're like, hell yeah, let's install a bunch of desktops. And the tech from not just the infrastructure, but even the software, it wasn't there. The early stuff, it was cute and it was great for like labs, but it wasn't good for production. And that's really evolved. And if we look at like where the industry's going, I think we're all starting to see, right? The desktop is just a launch pad for the applications. And now we've got that application layering. How do we get the app data out to the users faster? And how do we include the mobility? And I think that natural evolution is occurring. And yeah, we might not be to the apex yet, but we're well on the way.
All right, so the next question is, what technology improvements in the next year do you guys see the industry doing to improve adoption of VDI in general? And yes, you may talk about your product.
All right. I'll go since I'm talking product today. Yeah, real short. So for us, we just got acquired by a monolith machine of NetApp, and we've been preaching this idea of mixed workload and the fact that we don't have to isolate our environments anymore. Getting rid of that isolated environment is really going to help with the cost of ownership and speeding the time to delivery. Anything that starts with a P is going to end up in production, right? Pilot, POC. So you might as well have something that's going to scale with you. So that would be my thing, like the quick minute pitch of why SolidFire for this, and it's proving out. So that's easy for me. Anyone else?
I was going to say layering, and I think Sean would probably agree. Layering. We're saying it together. I think that application virtualization was a super interesting technology, but with a 60% success rate, you had apps left behind. Apps left behind mean users left behind means the project stalled in the mud. And I think between AppVirt, streaming, remote desktop services, and layering, you've got 100% app coverage now. So there's really nothing fundamentally stopping you from true non-persistence. And I also have to think that the things like they're doing with AirWatch and Secure Content Locker, that's the bridge to mobility. Anyone here managed PCs over time and now is managing phones and iPads and the other stuff? Yeah, so there's hands going up. That whole space is converging. So they're on the right path there, and we're contributing in our own way on the x86 side. You've been on both sides of the buy side and sell side. What are your thoughts? I'm just going to put you on the spot.
Thanks, Tyler.
Let's go that way.
Really appreciate that. So I did a session this afternoon that was relatively not product focused, and the whole idea of the session is this idea of focusing on performance, right? So if an end user won't use the technology you're putting in front of them, it's the fastest way to kill a project. I've personally done it. I've watched a number of customers do it. You can kill a VDI project by not making the end users happy. So all the technology things that they're talking about here are absolutely critical, right? The layering, all these things the multimedia, right? The things that go to that. But at the end of the day, if the desktops that you're delivering aren't as fast as the MacBook they can go and buy or the Chromebook or anything, if it doesn't boot in a few seconds, if you can't get to those applications right now, it's going to suffer, right? And so from our perspective, what we're really trying to do is take a different approach to solving the problem. The storage industry's been throwing bigger, badder boxes, slightly faster, slightly cheaper, at the problem for a very long time, and it's not really working. And so by changing the architecture, giving you a scale-out storage performance platform that scales with the hosts. As you add more VDI, you have more hosts, you actually add more performance to it. It's a fundamentally different approach, and we think hopefully that will be one of the fundamental game changers for it.
So, like what Mike was talking about, the key to me is time to value. So you talk about the amount of time it takes from, you bring some consultants on board, you get your use cases evaluated, and you're ready to start deploying desktops. If you're talking about having to deploy storage and compute and network and SAN, being able to eliminate that, or at least converge it into a single appliance and get the time to value down to a minimum, and increase manageability and increase performance in modular building blocks. I think that's a really compelling thing for VDI, especially because, like I said, you're typically deploying this complete stack for this one application. So that's what I'm at.
So I'll add a comment that doesn't really have anything to do with VDI or terminal services or that kind of stuff, because I've lived that world for 20 years and it gets boring after a while. I think that we're finally reaching a stage where that future state that everyone talked about, where everything's moved to the web and everything's moved to mobile, is really starting to get upon us. Now, I will temper that with a bit of harsh reality, which is to say, I recall in the late 90s when everyone, with the advent of the internet and the World Wide Web, where everyone said desktop apps are dead and everything's going to the browser. And then that really never kind of panned out. I mean, some apps did move, but the usability sucked. And so people still kept creating native Windows applications. And then over time, HTML5 came around. Everyone was like, well, this is it. This is the platform. Like, everything is going in HTML5. And then it didn't really happen. And then the App Store came around with mobile apps, and everyone said everything's going to a mobile app. And that has happened for mobile apps. But you don't typically see a Windows app being completely rewritten as a native mobile app or as a web app. You see that kind of fragments or workflows being shoved into those things. But the complex workflow-driven applications are still largely put into legacy-style constructs. So, but what is happening little by little is that people are taking capabilities that they had previously in a Windows app or even in a web app that was maybe not so user-friendly, and extracting out pieces of that and putting it in a little kind of like micro workflows into mobile apps and easy-to-consume web applications. So a lot of our focus that we've done the last year or two at VMware is to talk about this thing, this digital workspace. And it's not necessarily talking about the desktop as a container around things. I mean, yes, we've got VDI, yes, we've got RDSH, but the reality is today is there is a blended set of tools people are using. And within VMware alone, like, we use Salesforce, we use Concur, we use Workday, we use all these SaaS applications. Those applications replaced Windows apps that we used to deploy to every single desktop. And now these things are in a SaaS-based platform, and they're in mobile apps, and they're in different kind of things. So to get your work done during the day, I still rely on a number of Windows apps and actually Mac apps. I also rely on a number of SaaS apps and a number of mobile apps. And a lot of what we're trying to focus on is how do we blend those things together to make it seamless and usable across any device, even though we're putting together things that really have nothing to do with each other. And when I mentioned the thing about identity earlier, identity is such a key piece that stitches this all together, because if a user has to have 25 different passwords, you failed. Like, you absolutely failed. And yes, I know there's password managers out there and that kind of stuff, but you need to make it seamless for users to move between Windows, web, and mobile with the minimum amount of friction if you expect them to adopt these platforms across multiple devices.
So let me ask this of you guys, because what Sean's saying is resonating, and Massey and I had this whole conversation like for an hour last night about this. How many of you see Office 365 in your workplace or coming to your workplace? How much of that is because Microsoft throws it at you every time you have to re-up your ELA? Show of hands, like, how many of you have to pay for it every time? All right, great. How many of you got Azure credits as part of that as well? So it's becoming a commoditized race to the bottom on applications in the SaaS platform, right? Some of your apps are going to have to move and matriculate into this new paradigm of cloud-based or cloud-native, and however we work that, and allowing it to be available via any number of things, right? We've talked monolith applications, structured, unstructured paths, whether or not it's going to be containerized. There's all different ways to approach that, but it's coming, right? So you got to look at the solutions that make sense, and that's where I think VMware is really spot on. Like, if you look at the portfolio overall, it's more than just hey, we have app falls and we have VDI, like it ties into the Photon, it ties into VRA, it ties into the management platforms, it ties into the Cloud Foundry piece. Like there's other plays that are happening within that space that it's going to start convergence, and we're going to see a huge shift, I think, in that end user application and how it's leveraged and published and managed.
It's about Office 365. So I'll give an example of where I work. I work for the Minnesota State Colleges and Universities, and there's several people in the audience who are MnSCU people here. These are MnSCU IT staff that work within our system. And we all are embarking on a journey to Office 365 in a single tenant for the most part. So we are making that attempt to have a single environment where we all have collaboration. And it's just this massive project, 430,000 students in our system, 30 schools. And you're right about the Azure thing, what Azure and Microsoft is telling us. And now that you're in Office 365, you can use Azure, and we have a distinct single tenant Active Directory that's up in the cloud in Azure right next to Office 365. And so that's what they pitch. And it's something that really is beginning to happen a lot more. And I think a lot of people are looking at getting out of the email business. I was our Exchange admin. I'm actually very happy that I don't have to manage mail anymore. Extremely happy. And show of hands, who does not want to manage mail that does? I mean, yeah, look at that. That's amazing. So I think that that is a lot of where people are going to get into the cloud to solve a problem. And that just happens to be Microsoft Cloud for that. But there are other clouds that can solve other problems, such as Horizon Air. And that's another question I had for you, if you guys are willing to move on. What do you guys see the role in DAS in the cloud, in end user computing over the course of the next, say, 3 years?
I'm not qualified.
None of us are speaking until you speak.
Ken just Teflon that one.
Yeah.
Sure. So, what I see, I've been around DAS for the last 9 years. When we as Destone set out to sort of build the platform that we now have as part of the Horizon DAS platform and the Horizon Air. VDI was in its infancy. We're going back to 2007, really 2006. We set out to build a platform. We knew that people would go do VDI. We thought they would struggle whether or not they would struggle with the infrastructure requirements. They would struggle with and that infrastructure requirements really meaning from a resource standpoint. I got to hire a storage admin. I got to hire a data center admin. I've got to know about ping, power, and pipe. All the stuff that lots of enterprises may or may not want to do, especially the small and mid-sized enterprises. And so we built a platform that was built as a service to sort of separate these two sides. I mentioned this in the general session this morning. And what's now resonating that's now resonating as we grow and to come back to some use cases for DAS and then I'll talk about kind of where I think we're heading. Use cases for DAS, there's some that are just low-hanging fruit. Actually, universities is a great example of where there's high concurrent environments, right? You've got 10 students to every one desktop, or even 20 to 1 in some cases, because students go up and walk to a terminal that I saw up here, and they're on there for half an hour, and they're gone, right? So I think that resonates with a lot of universities, that high concurrent environment, mergers and acquisitions, where they got to get seasonal business. Work from home, right? All these things where either there's temporary needs to burst, or there's no need for me to bring people back to my data center. Why not just get them to the cloud? So that's all low hanging fruit. Those have been traditional DAS use cases, and we're seeing that again and again and again. What we're now starting to see, though, is really mainstream adoption of DAS. We're seeing actually more and more customers. So one of the biggest sort of headwinds to DAS has always been the fact that your infrastructure is in the cloud, but everything else you want is back on-prem, right? So you've got the site-to-site connection, my Active Directory is there, my mail is there, everything else is back on-prem. Well, as we were just saying, more and more stuff is moving to the cloud. Office 360, your mail is in the cloud. We're seeing more and more customers use desktop as their desktop and desktop apps as their sort of lead into the cloud, and then they're pulling everything else side by side with it. So, especially with our vCloud Air offering, so Horizon Air runs on top of vCloud Air, and we get a lot of customers that are joint customers of Horizon Air and vCloud Air because they buy, say, capacity for 1,000 desktops, and then they go and buy a VDC for their infrastructure that they want to run side by side with their desktops. So we're seeing more and more of that, and that's bringing the mainstream use cases into play with DAS. So it's not just these sort of niche use cases that it was for such a long period of time. And I think a lot of this is that, bandwidth is incredibly cheap and incredibly plentiful now, right? If I go back to when I started at Desktone in the middle of 2007, bandwidth was a major challenge, right? I mean, even in underdeveloped countries, bandwidth was a significant problem, and you looked at it and you said, how are they going to adopt DAS? Because the protocols have become much more efficient, but even still, you look at it and say, you can only scale so high, and bandwidth was fairly expensive to get some of that. That's all gone away at this point, right? So that's gone. We talked about the fixing the storage problems. That's solved, and all the mainstream use cases coming in. So I think DAS is here's the DAS guy telling you that DAS is sort of real now, but we're seeing this legitimately because we have literally Fortune 100 companies that are have initiatives to move, and I think where we're going, and certainly there's one or two very large opportunities, very large customers that are front and center in my mind, and thinking of some of the challenges they have. It is about the app compatibility and transitioning those apps. They're heavy into SCCM, and no matter what they do, they've got to repackage their apps one way or another, and I think finding a way to lessen that friction, right, in terms of getting their apps moved, is going to really unlock that even more. So,
and to dovetail into that, I mean, I think that while DAS is certainly the correct nomenclature to use for running Windows up there, I think that why limit ourselves to just running the full operating system? I think that user environment management elements, your user profiles, your specific applications, your data sets. It's kind of funny. I remember the first time I bought something on Amazon, I was kind of worried about swiping my credit card, where that information was going to go. And I think that over time, data locality doesn't concern us that much anymore. Just going to Office 365 and letting important docs be up there. So I totally agree with what you said in terms of where we are from an adoption standpoint. I would just add that it doesn't always have to be that full Windows desktop up there as a service. Your profile as a service, data apps as a service. Keep that open in your mind as well, because for your specific use cases, it might be a hybrid of 1, 2, or 3 of those. So.
Great. We're up on 4:00, so I think everybody wants to give away the prizes now. So it was a great discussion. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Yeah. Thanks.